Terry as well. Thank you for having me. And thank everyone for coming out. It's just the dinner hour here, so appreciate everyone joining us. I guess we'll get going. Yeah, I spent the last 20 minutes. My company works in a Teams environment, so I was a little panicked that it wasn't going to connect. So sorry if you saw me pinging in early. Oh, how do I move this forward here? There we go. We're up and running. Let me know if can you see everything? Can you hear me?
Yep, it all looks good.
Perfect. Okay. Hello. Yeah. So Belchim is been around for a while, and I'm going to make a basic introduction. You guys haven't heard from us in a while, so I'm going to assume you've never heard it from us before, and give a basic introduction and go through just 3 of our products. And you can see on that nice chart there, that's a handout we have that goes through our whole portfolio. But I'm not going to get into that. So today, I just start with an introduction. A bit about me again, since many of you don't know me. I'm based in Nova Scotia, and I have been about 20 years in the industry, which is kind of wild to think of. Horticultural ag, turf, in particular, I did across Canada. So I had a lot of years working in the BC industry with the high bush blueberries, working particularly with plant health, stimulation of defense mechanisms, really internal mechanisms and how it works. Really exciting future of technology. Then implementing new technologies as well on crops, figuring out how they work together. I've done a lot of work, very academic work, working with researchers, so I'm very comfortable with that. And I think it's exciting because, yeah, data is critical. And just a little about me, my second favorite meal is with blueberries is oatmeal. We have that every morning. I don't take selfies of food. That's probably the first one I've taken in a couple of years. So it was a little embarrassing, but kids put up with it. Yeah. And so our pro tip is use a rice maker. We use about 1 pound a day. So if we can get everybody eating that much blueberries, I think that'll do a lot of help for the industry. About Certus Belchim. Again, not everybody knows about us. We've been around officially in Canada for about 7 or 8 years, but we're owned internationally by a bunch of Japanese companies. As you can see there, the Mitsu group of companies and a whole bunch of companies that manufacture products and supply us. So they're providing directly to us as the Canadian distribution or supply. Then we also partner with a whole bunch of other companies around the world. And so we have a vast network of products that are coming. Our head office in Canada is in Gulf, Ontario, and our international distribution arm is based in Netherlands. So we're an odd group because people don't know much about us. So we're have a lot of products coming to market. But specifically for blueberries, you guys are most concerned. Here's just some of the products that we're focused on that are registered for blueberries. As you can see, that's not a small number. But when you group them into categories, we have the traditional fungicides, I call them low-risk fungicides. It's multi-site, less in the chemical resistance type products, bioprotectant or biopesticides, insecticides, biostimulants, and weeds. So we cover the whole gambit of products, and they have a wide range of labels of their benefits that they're shown for blueberries specifically. So we have quite a unique portfolio, but today I'm just going to speak to the 3 Diplomat, Sail, and Chikara. You've obviously, if you've attended any events in the last couple of years, you've heard of Chikara. It's a group 2. I'm not going to go into all the details. I don't think we have enough time for that, and I think most people know it. So if there's any questions, we can cover those at the end. But yeah, it's widely used as a fescue product, and it has a wide range of labels. We have about 3 pages of weeds that we have impact control or other that we impact. So it's a really unique product, and it's been really, you can apply it either pre-emergent. So I used Hugh's at Perennia's degree day model there. That's what he's recommending. Or you can do it post-harvest after a crop year. So we can get that in a second. Now, you've obviously heard a lot about it as Dr. White has done a lot of work on it, and he's an active participant. He might be on the call today if there's any really tricky questions. but I know he's presenting later today, so please hammer him with a whole bunch of inquiries if you do have them. But yeah, he's looked into a large number of blends, different weeds. I know he talked about red fescue and a unique blend for that. Obviously, he's worked with a number of researchers have worked with it, be it Hugh, be it Vanessa DeVoe up in New Brunswick. It's been very thoroughly looked into. Even the mowing strategy, I thought that was a unique one. So, I mean, here's some of the research that Dr. Scott shared with me, just showing some of the research he did going up to the registration. Obviously, we're a unique part of the world with low bush blueberries. So it's been exciting to see the work that's come out of his team. Some of the wisdoms he's prepared. Last year, we did a field day, and he prepared some wisdom that I thought I'd share with you. If you're considering baling hay, you should probably be using curb. Now, I say that as kind of a baseline, as curb is a good cleaner. However, everybody else, if you are looking just to clean up a field, or you're looking to really take care of fescue, partnered with Ignite is the best way to go. He recommends 5 liters a hectare, and it's the most consistent reduction of fescue turf density across all timings. He likes more water, and so he's saying we have a label that says a range, and he says pretty much 300 liters a hectare is probably your best bet. And again, because you have the fall or the spring applications, you really have that decision. It's a flexible in how you want to do it, but it really comes down to what works with your management protocols and your timing. In the fall, if you're just worn out, you probably don't have the time to do it. Do it in the spring, but if you have the time to do it in the downside of the spring is that if it warms up really early, it's a herbicide, it's a pre-emergent herbicide. So if you really want to get it out there, the fall is the best time to go. So one of the things he does say is there's been some rumblings about how it impacts plants. It's a herbicide, so you want to get it out pre-emergence. And if there's any slowing, that's normal. It promotes more blueberry emergence in the rhizomes. And so that's where he's seen some very positive, he hasn't seen any yield decreases at all. So there's no negative impacts to the plant. So if that's been a concern, that's certainly not something he's seen despite all his research at the recommended rates. So moving into Diplomat, that's another very unique product. We've had a lot of success. In fact, one of our fastest growing products at the company. It's a polyoxin D zinc salt. And so it's a general fungistat. And so it's had a broad range of applications. That's where these products are really unique in that they have, this one's derived from a soil metabolite. And so it's interesting to see the broad range of impacts across all the plants and crops that we work with. As you can see, this is not necessarily, sorry, I'm using my hand. The diseases aren't necessarily for blueberries. On blueberries, we have mummyberry and gray mold, but we're obviously looking to expand the label as we go. But these are the ones currently on the label. Actually, I'm going to say that on strawberries, one of the companies in the US, Driscoll Strawberries, says it's one of their favorite products. So it's people are getting more aware of all the potential applications. And again, you're not going to see, it's been around for about 50 years out of Japan, and we haven't seen any cases of resistance. So it's an excellent to integrate into programs. In fact, Dalhousie, Joel Abbey did some work on it back a couple years ago. And I'm not going to go through the details here, but as you can see, the green bars there indicate how it did in some of these trials. They did multi-site, multi-year with it, and it certainly performed as well as some of the common programs for botrytis. Obviously, he looked at a lot of different types of conditions, but there's a lot of different soil conditions and growing years, so it's nice to see that it's performing very well. Yeah, so definitely something to consider. Sale, this is obviously going back, it's a very popular product. If people are pretty well established in the market, the recommendation I'll say is that it has a 31-page label. So it's a very widely used product on a wide range of applications. In fact, in low bush blueberries, we have the following ones in there, and I included Omafra's high bush blueberry ratings. Obviously, we're not recommending to them, but we're just trying to give an indication of its potency. It's a very impactful product, and it's very popular. Today, I'm not talking about that necessarily. I'm talking about the fact that the bee toxicity is a big issue out there. And we've been recently going through some of the research and seeing that a sale, this paper here looked at the toxicity to various bees, which is one of the biggest costs to low-bush blueberry growers. And they saw that a sale is on this right-handed column here, showing the toxicity of the various chemistries. It showed up extremely low, so less than 1% in this study here. This was done by the USDA a couple of years ago. So just showing that it's not necessarily the high risk that people think it is. In fact, there's another trial on wild blueberries, and they looked at its impact. And their conclusion was no significant difference between the colony health of commercial honeybees when treated with agriculturally realistic levels of sale. So yeah, they're also seeing positive low risk. That doesn't mean, obviously, never spray it on bees, follow the recommended guidelines, but not nearly as problematic as people have discussed in the past. So again, our full handout on our full program, here's just some timing and the applications. I'm just showing this to you to see that we value research, we value data. We've worked with a number of groups. Obviously, low-bush blueberries is a very regionally specific crop, and we've published even kazoo and Inca. We've done work on with Dalhousie, and they haven't published on them yet, but they did some screening trials. And Chikara, we've done some substantial publishing. I think there's been a couple papers, as well as, like I said earlier, most people at Dal are very familiar, or in the blueberry program, are familiar with the product. So here's just some of our full labels. I'm not going to go into that because obviously we don't have time. See a large, and some of our other products out there. Again, that's a lot of detail for this call, so I'm not going to go into that. Happy to discuss that at a later date. Great reference is our website. It's being updated as our corporate entity is being converted over to Belchim, Canada. It's very little change except for branding and colors, but it's a great reference. It has all the labels. It has SDSs and tech sheets online, so I highly recommend anybody get into there, check it out. And yeah, and that said, I am a local resource. If anybody has questions or comments, I'm here to reach out. I'm going to be at most meetings. I'm currently in PEI at a potato meeting that just finished up today. Hoping to meet back the storm before it hits, so I don't get stuck on this side of the Maritimes. But yeah, I'm certainly around and happy to talk. Go to coffee for anybody who has questions or would like any resources, details, papers that I've discussed today, or just wants to talk blueberries or have a coffee. Happy to be a resource for you guys, and look forward to meet more of you in the future.
So you actually have probably another 10 minutes if you wanted.
Wow. Well, I can open up to questions. I didn't really want to read through labels with everybody here, but if there are questions, I'm happy to try to address them, or if there's a lot to talk about, so I don't want to go too heavy on these. Was there any questions or anything I would like to know more about?
I don't see anything in the chat.
So I'm just looking. I didn't see any. Yes.
Does anyone? If anyone does, feel free to unmute yourself.
Ron Welton put a question there on SWD. Did you want?
He just someone had just said that you didn't mention anything about.
I did not. I can go back to it though. Our product for SWD is again, low-bush blueberries is a fun world, as it depends on your supplier in the market you're going to. We deal in Europe, we deal across the planet with our company, but if you're exporting to the US, are you allowed to use an SWD product. Our Hervanta, as mentioned here, is a fantastic product. It's one of those next generation group 28s. We've had a lot of success with this. very low resistance for a wide range of crops. Again, probably because it's the newer one. A sale doesn't have SWD on the label. That said, we've seen some research, and I've talked to Terry about that in the past, about research saying that it has an impact, but obviously I don't want to make any claims on that are against our label. Did that help? Yeah, SWD is a tricky one, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah,
So has any of the processors had discussions with you on Harvanta? Like Wyman's does an awful lot of their sales in the States. So I would think that if anyone could make that work, it would be them.
Yes, and there again, since we haven't had somebody in the region for a while, I'm going through the multi-year process of getting not just on PMRA's list, but also the local groups listings. So that's one of those things I'm working with and speak. I have relationships with all of the partners, so that's one of those ones I'm trying to get on this year.
Any other questions for Dave? Quiet group.
It's okay. Yeah, you never know. I see some familiar names on the list. Thank you guys, everyone, for coming out again. Yeah, no, I like talking stress, plant health, plant stress. It seems from most of the trade shows and the experts there, most of the experts talk about the only consistency in weather is the inconsistency that we're going to expect. So it's nice to have a toolkit that isn't just one product. It can cater to a wide range of conditions, and also they have low resistance. So you look at some of our products out there. Obviously, we're trying to get more and more on the list, and we're a pipeline company. So we're, as a corporate, maybe not Blueberries, we have a number of, I think we have 5 new products coming to market this year. And so I think I heard a Syngenta quote last year, a couple of weeks ago, saying that it was $300 million for every product that comes to market. That's terrifying, considering how quickly we're burning through them. So yeah, no, it's excellent to have such a wide portfolio of products, and again, it's growing every year. So again, low bush blueberries is maybe not the focus of every big company out there, but we're certainly able to cater to it and work to develop, credibility on these crops. But if anybody does want to have a discussion on something that could fit, please do take my details down. I'm happy to have a further conversation. Again, I'm probably going to be in your area at some point. And yeah, I'm happy to help get to know everybody. It's you're a hardy bunch.
Yeah, technology. We are here tonight to talk about technology. Colin and I will give an introduction on our farm data tools, with a specific focus on those tools I use for wild blueberry management. So I will do the introduction, and it's going to be a very quick introduction for myself. As Terry said, just came back from China. I still have a jet lag, so I hope to go to sleep right after this presentation. So Colin is going to do a live demonstration on those tools, including how to find a site and how to create accounts and find those useful tools for your management. So for myself, I just want to say we are here tonight to sell this tool, and hopefully after tonight, more of you can create accounts and start discover those tools. And for those of you who already have accounts, there are some new features in this site after our second upgrades after this winter. So in order to convince you guys to use this farm data tool site for your management, I just want to pick the biggest challenge we have to grow wild blueberry is the weather. It's very significant and we can control it. In the short term, it's going to affect your spraying and in a daily or weekly basis. In the long term, I'm talking about in the same seasonally, the weather or the temperature can impact your crop growth stage and the timelines for your management activities. So if we can help you to understand your field better, and including to understand the weather condition and the long-term historical trend on your local region, that'll be a great idea. So in the short term, you'll be able to use those weather station or those weather data to track the in-field spraying weather conditions. So you know if it's a good day to go, or you might need to wait the next few hours. In the long term, you'll be able to use the local air temperature and start to calculate your growing degree days for your local region. And this particular number is useful for you to compare with different research based thresholds we have for you, including the F2 for monolinear management, the bloom stage for your botrytis application, and your beehives placement. And we also have some fruits GDDs for you to determine when do you need to worry about your first SWD or blueberry maggots trapping, and also when to start planning your harvesting schedule. So in order, those numbers are great, and we are going to use those numbers this season. I have presented the GDD project last November, and those will be our final numbers to use. So many of you are wondering, how do you find your local GDDs to compare with those thresholds I list here? And that's what we're here tonight for. So Colin is going to give us a live demonstration on how to find a site and how to set up accounts, and also some of the useful tools introduction. And I highlighted it here is the growing day. So that will be the tool you can use to calculate your local weather stations GDD, and then you compare with our research recommendations. And also there are some other features here. So I'm going to save the time and give the mic to Colin, and he is going to share his screen and yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Hugh. I think most of you are probably familiar with the Farm Data Tools website, but for anybody who isn't, it's a website designed and built to provide free public access to the network of over 100 on-farm weather stations. There's been a lot of work done in the last year to improve the site, and I think for anyone who's used the site in the past, I think you'll appreciate all the work that's gone into it and the improvements that have been made. So we're releasing Farm Data Tools version 2.0. And the purpose of this presentation, as Hugh just went over, is to introduce it to all of you, show you the site, show you its features, and if it's of interest to you, hopefully you'll be familiar with it and the features before going into this growing season. So I'll share my screen. So this is the landing page when you come to the site. The URL is up here at the top. I'll put that into the chat before I finish the presentation. This is intended to be a dashboard, and it features the hourly and long-term forecast from Environment Canada. That's what's on the left side of the page. So you get some of that short-term forecast and then the long-term here as well. On the right side is a interactive map that features a special weather statement layer from Environment Canada. That will be all the gray colors and the green in New Brunswick and blue in Prince Edward Island. And those would be the same special weather statements that you'd see from Environment Canada or on the Weather Network. And you can click on those. You have to click on the little information icon, and then you can see more details about the special weather statement. You'll also notice that there's a small icon here, and that is representing a user selected station from that network of the 100 on-farm weather stations. And then below here, you can see the conditions from that local weather station. And the user can choose where the Environment Canada forecast is coming from, as well as what station appears on the map by clicking this little magnifying glass icon and then choosing a new location. You select the province. You can either select a station if you know which one is you can select this would be the Environment Canada forecast station. So you can select one that's closest to you. So for me, that's Truro. And then the next selection box is for the on-farm weather station. So you can either choose from the drop-down menu, or you can select from the map and then have that added to the map, and that will change where the forecast is coming from. Also in this map is a radar layer. So you can play the radar layer and see if there's precipitation coming and where it's tracking to. It's the past up until the current. We hope to find a source that will give us a forecasted radar. But at least where it's playing, it lets you see the trajectory of where the precipitation is heading, and if it's heading for your direction. So the next page I'll show you, and there is a menu here on the left side of the website. The next page I'll show you is the weather page. And this is the interactive map that features all of the 100+ on-farm weather stations. So you can zoom in and find the weather station that's closest to your farm. And by clicking on any of the icons, you can see what the current conditions are at that site. So temperature, wind, etc. Some of you will remember that the growing degree day calculator was embedded in this pop-up window, and that's no longer the case. And I'll show you where that's moved to in a little bit. There's graduated symbology applied to the icons. So the color represents the value. And so if there was more of a variation within what we're seeing right now is temperature, but if there was more of a variation, some region of the province was warmer than the other, you would see that the colors being slightly different for that. So, orange and red representing more warm temperatures, and blue and purple being the colder. There's a layer button up in the top left-hand corner here, and you can toggle between the various weather parameters that are being recorded at these sites. So for example, I'll toggle to wind direction, and then we get these wind tails showing the direction of the wind. You can also change the base map. So if you're more familiar with looking at satellite base maps, you could use that to more easily identify where your farm is and what the closest station is. Also on this page is the ability to view historical data in a table format. So that's the boxes here at the above the map. You can put in a start date. So I'll start at the beginning of February. There's these predetermined date ranges. So you've got the option of a day up to a year. I'll put in a week, and then you can select the station that's of interest to you. So we'll just randomly pick a station here and press the search button, the magnifying glass. And it will just take a minute to formulate that information. So then it changes to a table view, and you'll notice it's the 15-minute increments of data and all of the various weather attributes that are being recorded at that site. So over a week worth of data is 59 pages. So tremendous amount of information that's coming out of these stations. If you're interested in downloading that data into an Excel file format, you can click this little cloud icon with the arrow and it will download that into an Excel for you if you're interested in doing some further calculations. If 15-minute intervals of data is too much to interpret, which in some cases it can be, there is this summary report button. And that summarizes the data by day, as well as some totals and averages down below. And again, you can download that information by clicking the little cloud icon with the arrow, and it'll put that into a CSV or Excel. One other feature of this this weather page, it'll let me go back, is there's this advanced search button up above the magnifying glass. So if I click that, there's a little bit of information about it, but the idea of this tool, this feature, is to pull out some of the extreme values that might have occurred at a station or stations. And so you can pick up to 10 stations. I think we're planning to expand that to all of the stations, but for now that's what it's set to. You can pick a start date. I'll just do for the month of February so far, and we'll just leave the time the same as the current time. And it'll look through that time period that you selected. So you could select, you know, if there was some major rain event or the polar vortex occurred, you could select that date range and then extract the extreme values from it. So if you're interested in it, what was the minimum temperature that occurred at that site in this date range, this is the tool that will do that. So it's about finding what the extremes were at various sites. So I'll put in minimum temperature. You can select all of these if you wish. I'll put minimum temperature just to keep the formulating part a little quicker. If you do select all of them into multiple stations, it will take a little bit longer to generate the information. And you can also some of these station names, they're smaller communities that you might not know the names of or where they're at, so you can use the map to select those stations as well. And then because I've only selected minimum temperature, I can toggle that on the map and visualize those on the map. And then it also generates this table as well. So again, I've only done it for the low temperature, but it's found what the low temperature was for these within that time range. And you can distill that down to a county level by clicking the this button up here as well. Really, this may be of interest to some of you, but really this is a tool mainly designed for Perennia staff and for the Department of Agriculture, so that when we do have major weather events, that we can quickly find out how extreme it was and where it was, and quickly do that. Up till this point, it was a lot of manual calculations and downloading a lot of data to come up with those results, and this is just going to speed up that work. So there was there's a lot of programs that come out from the Department of Agriculture post severe weather event, and some of this information is helping to guide that work. So the next thing I'll show you is the growing degree day calculator. It's quite simple. And I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the concept of growing degree days, so I won't go into that. But you know, very simple. Select the station that you want to base the calculations from. Pick your start date. We'll just keep it simple here. I'll just do this month, and I don't expect any results from this. Select your base temperature and press the calculate button. So it will spit out the results here and also show you a graph for that time period. As more data is being generated by these stations, it will and as years pass, it will also include the historical average. So you'll be able to compare where you're at this year to previous years. And then this you would combine with one of the resources that Hugh has shared from Dr. White with the blueberry phenology model, GDD model, and help make this number more useful. The next thing I'll show you, I think this will be of great interest to this group. It's the pest guides. And I have to say that I've not contributed to the work that's gone into these pest guides, but a lot of my colleagues at Perennia have, and it's quite amazing what they've produced. This is a guide to more quickly find up-to-date information on the pesticide options. And I think you'll get a sense of how easy it is to use once I show you a quick example. So I think what this group would be most interested in is obviously wild blueberries. So we'll just get right to that. So what you want to do is go to small fruit pest guides. And we'll go to weeds. So you can view a list of all of the herbicides in this guide, but there is this is using some conditional logic to narrow down what you're looking for based on the criteria. So we'll select, it was initially on strawberry, so I've selected wild blueberry. Next, you'll pick the growth stage, type of weed that you're interested in. And then you can hit search. And it will produce a list of all of the relevant products for that criteria. You can also put in some of the additional advanced options here as well, if you want to narrow that down further, or again, you can just view the entire list if you wish. But we'll say we're interested in this first option. You can click on it and see all of the relevant information. So it's quite a detailed resource, and it's great that that work's been done, and we're happy to have it included with Farm Data Tools site. The next thing I'll show you, I think one of the last things, is the soil map, the soil series map. And this is just a digital version of the provincial soil maps that are typically like PDF format. So this is just a more interactive version of that same information. So you can use this map to zoom into an area that you're interested in, maybe your own farm or a piece of land that you're interested in purchasing. It's included the road network in it as well, with the place names just to make it a little easier to find what you're looking for. So we'll go over here to Riversdale, and then you can click on any of these polygons, any of these colors, and it will tell you the information about that soil type. And if this is of interest, if the Farm Data Tools website is of interest to any of you, there is an account required. You have to set up an account to first access it, which is not a very onerous task. I'll just quickly show you what that looks like. So you just go to the link. You'll be prompted with the sign in interface. Click create an account. This is what it looks like to set up an account. Pretty basic. Your name, email, phone number, a little bit about where your location is and some of your interests. Click submit, and you'll get an access code sent to your email. You'll input that access code, and then you can sign in. And once you're signed in, you can make it so you're always signed in. So it's not something that you have to continuously sign into. And this page that I'm on to show you this is the FAQ, frequently asked questions section of Farm Data Tools. So that is the bottom option here on the side menu. So if you have any questions about how to use any of these tools or where to find them, you can access that via the FAQs page. Something else I'll mention while I'm here is there is the ability to customize this side menu. So when you initially sign into the account, you may not see all of these same options here, but you can just simply drag and drop any options by clicking this customize button here at the bottom. So if there's some of these things that aren't relevant to you, you can take them off and just click Save Tools. And last thing is that this site is, again, it's free to use. There's over 100 on-farm weather stations. Perennia is installing 24 more stations this year. And that is mobile friendly as well. So it should work on your phones. And again, the sign in, once you're signed in, it stays open. And we've tried to replicate a lot of the weather resources that we know farmers are using throughout the growing season. So all those things that Environment Canada features on their site or the Weather Network, they are also here, plus the benefit of having a local weather station nearby as well to help inform some of those decisions. So I'll pause there, and I'll hand it back to Hugh.
That's great, Colin. Thank you so much. I don't want to share my screen again, so I simply just put our contacts in the chat. So if any of you need to get in touch with us, Colin and Shoshona, they are the agri-technology program staff, so they can answer anything related to weather stations and the farm data tool. And if anything related to wild blueberry management, you can let me know. So no, that's great. And very importantly, this is free. So get try it on the next 2 weeks of the next few months and before April 1st, because our GDD calculation for the wild blueberry models will normally start from April 1st. So hopefully you can figure this out and try to pick your weather station and start to compare with some of the recommended numbers we have here. And I think we have 2 questions in the chat also. They're both related to farm data tool, and on the first one is only growing degree days. I think I can answer this quickly, Colin. So we try to design this growing degree days calculator in more general format. So every crop, every kind of pest, weeds, or insects can all use. So we set up a lot of pre-settings there. You can choose your weather station, your start day, and your base temperature. So you need to have the local scientific information about the pest or the crop you are entering. So this number is simply just a very simple calculation, and you can interpret these numbers in whatever context you need. The second question. Yeah, so similar to the second question, those number is just numbers. So you still need to find the information you can compare with, and most importantly, we are pretty small province, but we have a big variations on our weather and our growing conditions in these different regions. So encourage you to go to the fields to check the local in field growth in field crop stages, and compare with those numbers to see if they make sense. Especially during the springtime, in April, May, those 2 months, our weather just changed. I don't know, every 2 hours. So you need to be prepared to validate. Once you spend 1 or 2 seasons validate those information, you kind of get a good sense in your local condition and those numbers or some of historical trends for your region. So, and you start getting a very good sense on how things are going in the region. Yeah, so that's how we see this is going to be a very useful things and a very good sites for everybody to kind of start try on. We are going to continue adding more useful tools for the future. But for now, I think the weather and growing degree days calculator will be the most relevant and beneficial things for wild blueberry growers in this coming season, since we have those numbers that we can start watching and play around in this season. Yeah. So thank you for the opportunity for us to introduce this tool, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Hugh. Just one more quick question, just about if it's able to differentiate microclimates.
Lauren, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, so I think that is the goal of having all of these weather stations spread out throughout the province, is that, you know, what you're seeing in the Environment Canada forecast may not be representative of what you're experiencing on your farm. So if you can find one of these stations that is close to your farm, and you're in a microclimate, that you're getting some additional information to what you're seeing with Environment Canada. And there is the ability, if one wanted to purchase their own weather station, it could be added to this if it's the same model. So if that's of interest, that's something that we can chat about. But yeah, it's just finding a station that's close to you to deal with those microclimates.
And then one more question just came in. How do late spring or early summer frosts influence the growing degree day model?
Well,
I'll jump on that one, Hugh. That is the intent of the GDD model, is that each year is going to be a little bit different, and the GDD calculator itself is not the model. You're pairing that with a GDD model, but the GDD calculations is measuring the accumulation of heat. So, you know, a lot of crops, insects, one of the main factors that's influencing the growth is heat. And where you're at, say on June 11th, in terms of crop development this year, may be a lot different than next year or previous years, based on the type of spring that you're having. If there's some warmer temperatures in the spring, you're going to be a little bit further advanced. So the growing degree day calculator is just tracking that development versus just using a calendar date to do that same thing.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Colin and Hugh, very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So, here I am calling in from Orangeville, Ontario, and we're in the midst of a large winter storm right now. They're forecasting a foot, and if you ever follow the news, that's enough to shut down Toronto. So it'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. I think you're getting the tail end of this storm as we get into Thursday and towards the weekend. So be interesting to see what happens to you out there. But thanks for having me present here. Truro Agrimart, a key partner for us in the wild blueberry space. And the wild blueberry space for us is pretty new in the grand scheme of things. 2023, we first got registration on Soratel, our mummy berry fungicide, and since then we've been adding some more key products, and then are continuing to look at where we need to be. So it's definitely my favorite market to be in. As you can see in that picture, that's a beautiful crop, beautiful sprout field there. So what's current and new for 2025, and what we're working on for the future? I will touch on Adama's position in the crop protection space briefly here. We have a value innovation, value added model, and that's our route to market strategy. So we're taking proven active ingredients, chemistries that have been in the market, and we are reformulating them or creating unique mixtures, both for better efficacy, but sometimes for, a better user experience, a more value added product. Some of those I'm going to touch on in this presentation. And then also some of the things that we're looking at, and hopefully they pan out with some of the early data that we're seeing. But you never know in today's market with regulation and MRLs across the world where we're going to see success. So any questions, pop them up in the chat. You can be as hard as you want to answer them as honestly as possible. I will stress the importance early. We have a lot of digital resources available for our space in the blueberry market. Adama.com. We have an Eastern Canadian section where you'll see all the information on our products in the wild blueberry space. You can find your labels, rates, and whatnot through there. But largely, the experts that we've partnered with at Truro Agrimart, they are going to be able to do a lot of this for you and give you some of those economical and agronomically sound recommendations. Earlier, I touched on how Adama's just gotten into wild blueberries in a much bigger way in 2023, and how we approached the market was really closely tied to our tagline, the listen, learn, and deliver piece. Myself and a coworker, Drew Thompson. Drew is our technical specialist at Adama for Eastern Canada. We started visiting Dr. Percival, Dr. White, Dr. Cutler, and then started talking to the retails and going to the grower events to determine, what's needed, where is it needed, and how we can fit. And then we've started developing those relationships with, Truro Agrimart, so that they can make those agronomically and economically sound decisions. Been sitting in a lot of presentations and attending meetings with the New Brunswick Blueberry Group, your local Nova Scotia group, Wyman's, Oxford's, just to get a full picture of the market space. I'm confident that we're going to continue to grow in this market. We've identified it as a growth opportunity for us. And admittedly, I think Adama is much stronger poised to move bigger in wild blueberries than some of our competition. We see it as a big growth opportunity for some of our competitors. Maybe it's not big enough for them. That's all I'll say from a competitive standpoint there. But what we're seeing success with from Adama, taking those proven chemistries, unique formulated products, and most importantly, in today's low market economy of wild blueberries, our products are priced very fairly, quite competitively. I would encourage everyone to just reach out to Tim and Sandra and Chloe and Terry and Donnie and say, hey, we're hearing about this Adama portfolio for wild blueberries? You know, is it everything that we're hearing about it? So our marketing tagline within Adama Crop Protection, the all-in piece, we're certainly all in on wild blueberries. And historically, you know, we were selling Bumper, which is a propiconazole-based fungicide, into the space, and a good amount of Cormoran. And we've encountered some residue limit challenges with certain export environments. You know, so Bumper and Cormoran, not a big part of our wild blueberry success today. So, you know, the statement for sure, you know, speak with your exporter, packer, processor to determine, are these on your approved list or not? You know, Cormoran and Bumper could potentially be a couple of those. So for today, I'm going to focus on Maxentis, Soratel, and then touch briefly on Vantana, Cormoran, and then those ones that have an asterisk beside them, Arrowwall and Carmex, give you a lay of the land of where we're at today with those. So in 2023, we jumped into the wild blueberry space in a big way with Soratel fungicide. And that is our success at building a better mousetrap. So the competitive product in the market, ProLine, is a suspension concentrate formulation where you have the chemistry and then you have an adjuvant as well that you mix together, and it's a suspended product within a solution. Soratel, it's powered by Azorbital tech, and I'm going to touch on Azorbital technology here in a few slides. But the beauty of Soratel, we took the chemistry part of it, combined it with the surfactant, all in the same jug, into an emulsifiable concentrate formulation. Now that means, at its simplest terms, all droplets are uniformly the same, and within that solution, it's got like UV inhibitors in it, which helps reduce photodegradation when it's on the plant leaf. And a lot of our studies are showing just improved penetration into the plant, improved efficacy. But most importantly, what we see is just more consistency in its use. So it could be hot or dry or cool and foggy. And we see far more consistent efficacy than some of the competition. And what a success story Soratel has been. You know, in just a few years, it's I believe to be the industry standard for that mummyberry application season. You know, mummyberry is the #1 application window for it, but it is seeing an increasing amount of usage during the sprout year for leaf rust and septoria. This picture here, what it's depicting in layman terms is we used a Q-tip to dab that protected area, the area between the black lines. On the left, we dabbed that area with Soratel, and on the right, we dabbed that area with a competitive prothioconazole. And then we applied septoria spores across the whole leaf. And what you'll see with the Soratel infected leaf here is the basopetal and acropetal movement of the Soratel up and down that leaf versus the competitive. It was only able to protect where it was applied. So a bunch of that is with the Azorbital technology, where we see that enhanced downward and outward, upward migration to protect a larger leaf area. Oh, I see something in the chat here. Do we have any plans to register Arrowwall in for low-bush blueberries? Yes, and I'll get to that in a few slides. Thanks. Maxentis, a new introduction into the wild blueberry space for us last summer. Maxentis is a uniquely formulated product in the market space, not only for wild blueberries, but all of the other crops that it's registered on. It is a combination of prothioconazole, which would be Soratel or Proline, and azoxystrobin, which is half of the component of Quilt, but also would have been a product called Tilt in the past. We've made Maxentis in the same fashion as Soratel. So we've taken the adjuvant surfactant and put it into the same jug to give you the two modes of action, the group 3 and the group 11, into this fungicide. Where this fungicide is seeing use right now is in that sprout ear rust program. It is starting to see more use and good efficacy for red leaf control. We still have to finalize the red leaf portion to get it on the label, but that's a matter of getting more data points to submit to PMRA on that. So Maxentis, in some respects, is similar to the old Quilt, but Quilt was propiconazole and azoxystrobin. Propiconazole does have some export considerations you have to take into account versus the prothioconazole. So, touching on Soratel and Maxentis in this space a little bit, we talk about isorbitol technology with our chemistries, and what does that mean? It's our marketing term for the process that we make this formulation, and it's how we're optimizing the active ingredients within it. So by using the isorbitol with emulsifiable concentrate formulations, every droplet is uniformly the same. It just helps with mixability, always stays in suspension, and then we can bring in the surfactant piece into the same jug, but we can also ensure that it reduces photodegradation as it's sitting on the plant leaf in high sunlight. So it does make it a more consistent and easier to use product. In chemistry terms, you have your suspension concentrate, which is a lot of crystals within a formulation, and the carrier that carries those crystals. And then emulsifiable concentrate formulation is where you have a solvent, in this case, the isorbitol, that keeps the stable environment for the active ingredients that are within it. Isorbitol is that solvent. So a key thing to keep in mind with these two fungicides, historically, you would have the cost of the fungicide, and then the fungicide may or may not need to have a surfactant mixed with it, whether that's Agrol 90 or Merge. There is a lot of different surfactants on the market space. With Soratel and Maxentis, it's built in. So you need to keep that in mind when you're pricing out some of these products. A surfactant in today's market can run you between $1.50 and maybe $3. So that cost is built into Soratel and Maxentis, something that's resonated quite well with the users. And also at the end of the day, you have one empty jug versus two. I see a question in the chat there. What is the cost of these products per acre of application? That is a question for Chloe, Tim,
I think, yep, I think Sandra, I saw that question and we're just working it out right now. So stay tuned.
Yes, thanks for that, Mr. Kennedy. Our prices in the marketplace are really good on Adama blueberry products. Makes me feel good, especially in this low value market. So I will jump gears to a product that we released last year. It's a herbicide, weed control product in wild blueberries. It's called Involve 50 WDG. This is a product that we had in the market space for other crops for many years. And as my coworker Drew and I were coming to the Maritimes and investigating wild blueberries, we saw that this active ingredient, tribenuron, was being used for that sprout, bunchberry, sheep sorrel, and post-harvest sheep sorrel bunchberry control with a product called Spartan. And looking at the price point that we had it in a row crop, it was a no-brainer to do the work required to get wild blueberries put onto this label. And then the next step was to get it in the hands of the weed specialists. So Scott White at Dalhousie has had this for the past couple of years to make sure that it is the same or potentially better than the market competitive product Spartan. So Involve is in position with Truro Agrimart. It's in position for this 2025 crop year, and that early sprout application is definitely not too far away. Switching gears to a product that you will likely recognize, Cormoran was our flagship spotted wing Drosophila SWD product. Also, the recent data that came from Dr. Cutler at Dalhousie was its incredible efficacy on cranberry fruitworm. There are some residue limit challenges with Cormoran in certain parts of the world. So, you got to talk to your exporter processor on this one. There is certain scenarios and certain exporters processors that would allow Cormoran, but there are some challenges with one of the majors. But Cormoran is another unique product in the marketplace. That unique combination of the group 4 acetamiprid and then the group 15 novaluron. So one provides that knockdown, but also that effective kill through ingestion, the group 4, and then the kitten inhibitor, the group 15 novaluron, that targets the eggs and the adults. They don't produce any viable offspring. Cormoran consistently ranked the highest in a lot of independent SWD cranberry fruitworm trials. We were sad to see the challenges it had with some of the residue limits. However, it does still have a small place in the future, and we're still investigating, a couple new pests on it. So more to come there. Vantana fungicide. This Vantana is a fungicide we released to the market last year for a multitude of different crops. It's a very broad spectrum protective fungicide, group 29 fluazanam. It does have mummyberry, Phomopsis fruit rot, fruit anthracnose, Baldwin leaf spot on the low bush wild blueberry label, though it doesn't seem that this chemistry has caught on in a very big way. I believe that's partly due to price. It's historically fluazanam was in the market space with Allegro, and quite the premium price product, and maybe not as good on botrytis as some of the other fungicides. So I think historically it was in that kind of middle ground where there was cheaper, more effective options for mummyberry, but then some of the more botrytis related challenges, there was better options. So I bring this one up simply because it is a unique mode of action. Availability is really good. Prices come down substantially, and it's going to be worthwhile for us investigating it, but potentially also it combined with other things as this market evolves. And I shouldn't I shouldn't have ended on this slide, but what a challenge we've had with Arrow All In. You know, today we're 2025, trying to understand and determine where clethodim Arrow All In is in low bush blueberries. I can tell you that it's not here yet. We're still looking to get approval on this. We've learned a lot of things over the past couple of years, and there's still a lot of things that I don't think we've learned in terms of minor use, the support, data, lots of things. But I'm confident that in time, we'll get there with Arrow All In and low bush. I threw Carmex up on the screen there. The wild blueberry group growers, you have awesome guy in Scott White, and the fact that he's reaching out to us constantly saying, hey, Adama's got this somewhere else, somewhere other far away country. And, you know, Carmex was one of those products that he reached out to us and said, hey, I believe we used this many years ago, and it's registered in Maine in blueberries. Can I get some to trial it? And then what would it take to get this across the finish line? So, you know, a genuinely curious person by nature he is, and I am as well. So we got some in the hands of him. And if you were attending the AGM last November, don't quote me, but I believe he said this was the best residual shoot sorrel control he's ever seen. You know, that certainly got us excited, and I think he was excited too. So we're investigating Carmex as well. You know, maybe it's not dead. So hopefully we can continue to develop and bring things into the market space. And I touched briefly on, you know, some unique combinations, whether that's fluazina and prothio, but there's things happening in the background with Dr. Percival and our R&D team to see what's next and where we can go. But to recap, if there's some key takeaways for you with this presentation is we are here to support and partner with the wild blueberry industry. We're looking to grow in this space, and we're looking to show up, continue to show up, quality performance supported, but at a fair and competitive price. So on all of those pricing questions, you just got to reach out to the team at Churro Ragamart, and they can get back to you with that. So I will thank everyone, and curious to see how that snowstorm hits you on the weekend.
Perfect. All right. So Matthew, we do have just some quick math that we kind of just did on the fly. So Sorrel is around $22 to $24 an acre, and Max Centis is around 14. So that's kind of just quick math, but that's kind of the current update.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from what I've seen competitively, I think that should resonate well with you know, some of the growers in today's market.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, there's my information for everyone on this call. I love to chat wild blueberries, and can't wait till I'm back in the field again. So reach out. I'm available, and I really appreciate it. Thanks,
Awesome.
Churro.
Yes, thank you very much, Gavin, for joining us tonight.
No problem.
All
Okay.
right.
We'll
No
see
more
you.
questions for Gavin before he goes. If you feel free to unmute yourself if you do. I'll take silence as a no.
Excellent.
Perfect. Thanks, Gavin.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks again, and as always, very happy to be here to talk about weeds. So a very generic title tonight because I just kind of got a smorgasbord of a few things here that I either wasn't able to get to for the November meeting, or I've added in response to questions that have kind of come in sort of around November. in December. So one thing I did want to flash up first is there might finally be a crack in the dam when it comes to clethodim. So Ron Welton had sent this to me today, and there's at least one clethodim product. I don't even know if it's even available in Atlantic Canada, but there is at least one product that does have low bush blueberries on the label now. I think it's a UPL product, and I believe they are looking to get low bush blueberry onto their select trade name labels as well, but it's not moving very fast. So I don't know. I have no idea. But there is at least, one clethodim product. So the active ingredient clethodim technically is registered in low bush blueberries right now. So I'll just leave that out there, just to kind of let you know that, this may get things moving, and hopefully the arrow and other things will come along right behind this very, very soon. But what I wanted to point out is this product, if you do look at it on the label, will say it's 250 mils per hectare. But the key thing is a lot of the different clethodim products have different concentrations of the active ingredient clethodim in it. So if you do use, if for whatever reason you do feel the need to apply something, go by 90 to 91 grams of active ingredient per hectare. That's the labeled limit for active ingredient, and as long as you're following that, it should be okay. Hey, now one of the main things that I wanted to talk about tonight that I didn't get a chance to talk about in November is, as many folks know, myself and a grad student, Marcos Lima here, we started a water survey this summer, basically with the goal to basically try to determine a range of water quality parameters associated with the water sources that you folks are using for spraying, to identify any potential sort of shortcomings or problems with some of those water sources that you might be able to remedy with adjuvants or something like that. So we're basically looking into this to kind of see, is your water holding you back? So is your water inherently reducing the efficacy of your pesticides? And if so, what might be some opportunities for mitigating that, improving that. So we collected 88, we sampled 88 water sources used for spraying this past summer in Nova Scotia. The dots are the sites we sampled, and then the two big dots, one in sort of the southern end of the province and one in Cape Breton. I just put those two big dots there because a lot of our samples were collected and provided to us by the growers, and they weren't all GPSed. And so we don't have the exact coordinates for them, but we did get a number of samples from the South Shore as well as from up in Cape Breton as well. Okay. Now, just to get started on some of the numbers, this is kind of how the water sources break down numerically, based on source. So the big standout, and I think most people will be aware of this, that about 70% of the water sources used for spraying are surface water sources. Usually a brook or a pond that's either close to the field, or a river that's close to the field, or a brook, pond, or river that's en route to the land that you need to treat with a pesticide. But there was also a fair amount of well water used. And then we have 17 samples that were collected by growers that we don't have the information about what the source was yet. But I just wanted to highlight this because you can have distinct differences in water quality parameters between surface and subsurface water. And the fact that the majority of the water that you folks are using are surface sources kind of explains some of the results that we did find with the analysis. So we measured a range of things on the water samples, and I'm going to sort of preface this by saying I am not a water quality technician. I am not a water chemist. So I'm learning as I go about a range of this stuff, because it's certainly not my day-to-day by any means. But the main parameters that I wanted to sort of present quickly tonight are pH, and then below that, you'll notice I've got little clusters of things all in the same row here. And if you have things in the same row together without a divider, like hardness, alkalinity, and iron, it's because they're all different, but they all reflect a similar aspect of water quality and all have a similar effect on things like pesticide performance. So I'm just going to zip down through these sort of one by one, so that we could just kind of work down through them. So the first one here, pH, this is one of the more important ones, because the pH of your water can affect, you know, how soluble a pesticide is in that water. It can affect the degradation rate of pesticides, and it can also affect whether or not a pesticide molecule will or will not carry a positive or a negative or a neutral charge. Okay, now I do want to acknowledge that the pH of your water is kind of one thing, because as soon as you start adding stuff to it, e.g. pesticides, they will inherently cause, and adjuvants like Li 700, they will inherently begin to cause changes in that pH. And so the pH of your final spray solution, depending on what's in there for products and adjuvants, is going to differ from the background pH of the water because of the effect of the products on that. But at least if you know what you're starting with, you can know sort of if you're going in the right direction or not. So this is the range of pH values that we found across the 88 samples here. Generally, most are, from the best of my knowledge, are actually pretty good. So sort of the optimal range for most pesticides in terms of water pH is 4 to 7. Probably most ideal is right around 6, although I would let any chemical company representative make specific comments about their products. But generally, if you're in the 4 to 7 range, you should be okay. Probably ideally a little closer to 6 is probably a sweeter spot to be than up near 7. The water that I use for all my trials has a pH of about 7 as well. It's the extremes where you can run into issues. So if you're on the extreme acidic end or the extreme alkaline end, that's where you can begin to run into issues. And in many cases, it's your water being too basic or too alkaline, that can be quite a significant problem with a lot of stuff. And based on the analysis of the samples that we took, about 35% of them were probably a little too far on the alkaline side as you begin to push towards pH 8 or above, because that can have quite an effect on the degradation of different pesticides, which I'll just get into a few numbers here in a moment. But if you're on the acidic end, you have potential for accelerated degradation of anything with a group 2 on it when it comes to herbicides. They can also break down if it's too basic. They're kind of really finicky chemicals, to be honest. And then some of the insecticides and stuff can potentially break down quite rapidly, actually, as your pH begins to go above 7. So I don't want to get bogged down in this table because there's a lot of numbers here, but I just kind of want to highlight with a few of them, you know, just how fast things can begin to change, even with very small changes in pH. And so I got some different pesticides up here. I have little interest or care about the insecticides and the fungicides, but I know as growers, you guys are using them, so I just added a few here. Note my footnote here. These numbers are not necessarily easy to find on molecules, and so it's something that between myself, the grad student, Marcos, as well as a range of other experts, we're kind of hoping that we'll be able to provide, you know, very detailed information on a range of products at some point. But if you look at dicamba, so common spot spray for things like dogbane, based on the literature, that molecule is unstable at a pH below or above 6, so below 5 or above 6. Now, all of that stuff with dicamba that I can find all that work was done with it back when it was Banville. So I need to talk to Blair Fraser with BASF there to kind of see if the new Ingenia products are susceptible to that. But it would suggest that, you know, if you have really basic or really acidic water, your dicamba degradation may be a bit erratic if you're outside of that pH range. And then with group 2s, so rim sulfuron, this is one of the active ingredients in Steadfast. And just note, as you go from a pH of 2 up to a pH of 6.5, look how dramatically the half-life of that molecule increases. And so if you have Steadfast in your spray tank and your water's at pH 6.5, the sprayer will need to sit there for 12 days before half of your rim sulfuron is gone. But if that water's at a pH 2, it's only 0.08 days, which is like, I don't know, an hour or something like that, right? And then as you go past 6.5, it begins to degrade much more rapidly again. And so the reason that this kind of stuff is important is because depending on where you're at with your pH starting, as well as the final pH once you get everything mixed up, you know, depending on where you're at, even a matter of having stuff mixed up for half a day or less, you can be looking at some fairly significant loss of the active ingredient in that tank, right? So, because some of the molecules are quite susceptible to this, some of them less so. I just got a few others up here just so you can see there's a couple insecticides, and you can kind of see how as things get more basic, how much more faster some of them or how more rapid some of them break down. And there's a fungicide there as well. And in a lot of cases across the board, with exceptions here, mind you, but in a lot of cases, again, it's the extremes in pH, being too basic or being too acidic that is the problem. And so you kind of just want to be in that sweet spot, 4 to 7, maybe hovering around 6, if you can. So just because, you know, this, I don't want to get in. I was just going to say, because I had a grower tell me that for maggot fly control, I know he said flat out, we got one water source where the insecticide works great, and another water source that where the insecticide doesn't seem to do a damn thing. And when we did the test on it, the one that didn't work had a really basic pH, for example. So it seemed to potentially be having an effect there. Okay. Now these ones here, hardness, alkalinity, and iron, these all basically reflect the presence of charged either cations or anions in the water that can bind with negatively or positively charged herbicide molecules or other pesticides. Now, total hardness, this is the one that most folks are most familiar with because this is measured, you know, even for drinking water and stuff like that. And so that's metals with a greater than +1 charge. And the main tests for water hardness test for the presence of calcium and magnesium. And if they're present in your water in large amounts, that positive charge on those cations can be attracted to the negatively charged herbicide molecules such as glyphosate, night, and other things. Alkalinity is kind of a weird one because it has to do with carbonates and their ability to buffer pH changes by attracting protons or hydrogens, but they can also interact with different types of herbicides, the group 1s like Venture, for example, and they can also add other cations to the water because this stuff gets a little out of control if you let it. But because they're negatively charged, they can also be bound with things like sodium and other positively charged cations that can potentially cause an issue. And then iron is quite reactive, but generally not present at large quantities, but we also measured that. So here, this is the water hardness data that we were able to get. And the obvious trend here is almost 90% of the samples or more are hovered over to the left here at the low values. And that's again largely because most folks are using surface water, and I mean, unless you're in a drilled well that you cut through those seams and stuff or whatever, most surface water doesn't tend to have a high level of water hardness, give or take. So most of them most of the samples that we collected and analyzed did not seem to have too much water hardness. The water hardness didn't seem to be high enough to potentially cause an issue. Generally speaking, it's kind of when you start to get above 200 that you can potentially run into issues. But I do want to stress that if you look into this stuff, you'll find one source that says this level of hardness is bad for glyphosate. Another one will say it's got to be way higher than that. There's a lot of sort of inconsistency, but you know, if you're spot spraying with Roundup, say, and you've got water that's 150 to 400 parts per million water hardness, that's a water source that could potentially be binding with that Roundup and potentially reducing efficacy. And Ignite and Callisto can be susceptible to that as well. And so if you're running, my honest opinion is if you're running around 200 part per million water hardness, you may want to consider adding a water conditioner like ammonium sulfate or something to overcome that issue. And we did talk to some of the growers that had these higher levels and came up with a plan to kind of work around that water hardness. But for most of you, and I think in general, if you're pumping water out of a brook or a pond or a stream or something, chances are hardness is not something that you're really going to have to consider too much in terms of affecting the pesticides that you're using. Alkalinity tends to follow a similar trend, and so alkalinity, which is parts per million of the carbonate here, it was also generally quite low, so there was only one sample that got up over 200. From what I can find, if you are in the 300 to 500 part per million range, so it takes a fair amount of this stuff to cause issues. It's not really until you get up to these levels that you run into issues. And so that doesn't seem to be, you know, the alkalinity of the water you guys are using doesn't really seem to be, you know, a major issue either. Now, iron, we added this. It was kind of, we didn't start out wanting to test for iron, but then Marcos did stumble upon a paper. There's not that much information on it in terms of actual scientific evidence to show. Chemistry of it makes sense, but there's not a lot of evidence for specific pesticide products. But when we did analyze it, again, most of the water samples were relatively low. There was one, so the test kit we had, it either gives you 5 parts per million as a max, or it indicates that the water level is greater than 5 parts per million. And this one here on the end, this was well water from a site in Parsbro, and the water kind of looked like a urine sample. It was so yellow. So I think you could have tricked the doctor with that water test. It was quite obvious that there was something in it when we collected the sample. And it could be 5,000 parts per million for all I know, because our test kit didn't go that high. But from what I can find, and I could be wrong on this, but from what I can find with iron in the few instances, its effect has been directly estimated on a herbicide, is you got to get into the tens to potentially hundreds of parts per million before you start to run into issues. So I know in Nova Scotia, I used to live in an apartment where every fixture was yellow because of the iron in the water. I know there can be iron in, you know, in some of the well water. So, but from the samples that we collected, it doesn't seem to be sort of holding anything back. Okay, so out of those three, just the general hardness seems to be the bigger issue. These other ones don't seem to be as big of an issue as far as I can tell. Now, the turbidity and total suspended solids, this is just how much crap there is floating around in the water. So turbidity is sort of just how cloudy or murky is it looking. And we use what's called a turbidity tube to test for that. And then total suspended solids is just determined on a dry weight basis. And the basis behind that is just simply that if you have soil and organic matter floating around in your water, they carry a charge, and that charge can attract your herbicides. And once the herbicide binds with that stuff, it's not going to get in through the leaf and so on. And so that's why we kind of looked at that. But every sample we collected, with the exception of one, was, I wouldn't say crystal clear. There was always some sort of coloration to a lot of the samples, but turbidity was generally very, very low. So the water samples that when we went with growers, the grower says, this is where I get my water from. Most of the time, the water was running clear. So most of the water sources being used, this water source itself is clear. But what I would say is if you stir up sediment or anything like that when you're pumping water out, if you bring that into your tank, I know there's filters and stuff, but if you introduced turbidity or suspended solids via the process of filling your tank, we didn't account for that in this particular survey. And so you do want to keep in mind that if your water source is clear, but you muck it up when you load your spray tank, you will have a bit of a negative effect there. And the negative effect is strictly or almost directly related to how reactive a herbicide is with soil particles and organic matter. So this KOC value, the higher the number, the more an active ingredient likes to stick to soil and organic matter. So again, if you were spot spraying Roundup with muddy water, a lot of that glyphosate is going to stick to that mud into the soil particles and likely not provide adequate weed control. And so I got these ranked by the ones that would be most susceptible to turbid water here based on the KOC values there. And then the total dissolved solids here, this last little bit, this is looking for other ions in the water other than iron, carbonates, and calcium and magnesium. So they do get accounted for in here, but they also, these sort of test methods also allow you to get a sense of what else might be lurking around in your water. And the total dissolved solids is just a dry weight kind of thing through filter. And the most practical way to get this is this electrical conductivity. And so you just use a conductivity meter and it passes an electric current through the sample. And the more negatively and positively charged ions you have floating around in the water, the greater the electrical current that will go through it, and you get that reading. Okay. And so these are all sort of an assessment of water purity to some extent, and they tend to kind of parallel each other. So this is the electrical conductivity readings here, and this is total dissolved solids. These are all very low. And so the ones that might be an issue is there was a couple samples you can see out here to the right. There are some that had probably enough total dissolved solids to potentially cause some issues. But generally, from what I can find, if your electrical conductivity is below 500, then that probably means that there's not enough charged ions floating around in your water to potentially attract to and stick to things like pesticides. Okay? And the reason that we do total hardness and electrical conductivity is because electrical conductivity allows you to see if there's other non-calcium and non-magnesium ions in the water, right? So you could have low water hardness, so hardly any calcium and magnesium, but you could have a ton of sodium or something else in there floating around, and you pick up on that by measuring both hardness and the electrical conductivity. Okay. But again, overall, I don't see too many major issues with a lot of the water sources that are being used. And from this initial survey, I think the biggest issues potentially lie in the fact that there are some extremes in pH that you could consider sort of remedying or mitigating. And I'd be happy to chat with any growers that know they're on the high or the low end of the pH scale, talk about how you might be able to deal with that. And then there are some hard water concerns with some of the samples, but most of the water sources should actually be pretty good for general pesticide use, as far as I can tell. Now, the long-term goal here, and this is not what it's going to look like, but the goal would be to work with other experts for some of the other pesticides and stuff, and kind of develop charts where you can kind of look at a water quality parameter in a specific pesticide product, look at what are the concerns, and then get some information on how you might mitigate those concerns. Okay, because some of these parameters, they can have some temporal variability. So just because we collected a sample from you and it checks out okay right now. I would encourage just out of habit, even if nothing else comes out of this other than to raise some awareness, never hurts to have some pH test strips and some water hardness test strips just to randomly or somewhat routinely just check the water that you're using, just to make sure that nothing's changed and that it's not drifting to an extreme that may cause any issues. Does anyone have any questions on that water survey? Okay, now one question that kind of come up a bit more through the fall is sort of what is the best timing for Chiquera and Ignite for fescue. So I'm going to show some stuff here, and it's the information I give here is strictly for fescue, ignoring any potential benefits to any other weed. Strictly for fescue here. And what I did is I've got so many trials done now that I just made a nice big huge data set so that we could have a nice clean comparison of the fall and the spring timing relative to a non-treated control. And so I'm just going to show, to get going here, show a few bar graphs showing fescue tuft density at the time of fall and spring applications, and then at a couple of key time points throughout the 2-year production cycle. But before we do that, I just want to point out here that something that kind of came out from this larger data set, you'll notice here with the letter groupings, is that in general, fescue tuft density was lower going prior to applying fall herbicide treatments than it was prior to applying spring herbicide treatments. So this would be equally applicable to any fall treatment versus spring treatment, not just Chiquera and Ignite. But you notice that the fescue tuft density here for the fall treatment is a little bit shorter, it's a little bit lower than the control and the spring treatment. Now, when I have a fall and a spring timing in trials, the fall treatments, the density gets determined in the fall prior to spraying, and then I always get the density in the control and the spring treatments in the following spring, just to spread out, balance out the workload there. And I think this is a real difference, and I think the reason is this right here. So what this bar graph is showing is fescue seedling emergence as a percent of total seedlings emerging over the 2-year production cycle. And so it's starting on the left here, we're in the spring of the sprout year, and then summer, fall sprout year, and then winter, and then spring, summer, and fall of the crop year. And each bar represents a percent of the total number of seedlings that emerge over that 2 years. And so if you look at this first bar right here, spring sprout year, what this bar means numerically is this bar is telling you that 10% of the total number of fescue seedlings that emerged between spring sprout year and fall crop year emerged at this time point here. And I've just got this as a percent to make it easier to talk about and easier to compare across sites. But if you look right here to the far right, you can see that over 80% of the total number of fescue seedlings that are emerging in a blueberry field are emerging in the fall of the crop year. Now, to sort of a caveat of these numbers is this is what happens when you don't do anything to fescue. So these data are taken from sites where the fescue wasn't controlled and it was just mowed, and then we could monitor it over the 2-year cycle without the influence of any herbicide applications. But you can see that the seed output of fescue is generally much, much higher in the crop year than it is in the sprout year. And the reason for that is simply that going into the sprout year, the plants have been mowed and the clumps of grass are smaller at the end of the sprout year than they are at the end of the crop year. And as the size of these clumps of fescue increases, the number of seed heads and hence the number of seeds produces increases proportionately. So when you look at the end of the fall here, going into fall of the crop year, when you're going to be mowing and applying fall herbicides, you're getting this huge surge of seedlings coming up at that time. And so I hope someone is sitting there saying, well, wait a minute, if you got all these seedlings coming up, then why the hell is this bar less than these other bars when you have all these seedlings coming up? The problem is you can't see the damn things. So the only way I got these data was when I first started, before before we had this, and I was just going to say before I went even crazier than I am now. I spent a lot of time sitting on the ground with pencils and tweezers, combing through the duff layer and the debris, looking for these little tiny seedlings that are coming up. It takes a ton of time. It's really hard to do, and you can't do that in day-to-day trials because of the sheer amount of time it would take. It's just not a feasible activity. And so when you look at these numbers, you're getting a ton of seedlings coming up in the fall, but in the grand scheme of things, they're really hard to see because they're hiding in amongst all the mowed debris and everything. And so they don't necessarily get counted in the fall, but they are going to get a stab. Many of them are going to die before the end of the winter, but a lot of them likely survive. And then the ones that survive will form a little clump of grass, and then we will find them in the spring as a newly established tuft. And so that's why that spring density is a little bit higher. And that's the key thing that I want you to take away from this graph right here, is I do believe that there's a true effect here. And the reality is that if you wait till the spring to control fescue versus the fall, your fescue population is actually going to undergo a little bit of an increase between the fall after mowing and the spring, and that higher density in the spring may influence the results that you get in terms of weed control. Because if anybody watched some of the sessions earlier today, Peter Sikkema sort of reiterated the idea that more weed density, higher weed density reduces weed control with herbicide. And so I think there's potentially something like that happening here with fescue as well. But anyway, that's the starting density in the fall and the spring and the control. This is at the end of the sprout year. And again, this is averaged across 60 some, like this is a lot of data going into. That's why the standard error is so small here. And you can see the control here, spring Chicair and Ignite, and then the fall Chicair and Ignite. And the fall treatment generally was about twice as good averaged across trials for fescue control as the spring treatment by the end of the sprout year. And then going into the crop year, so the year that you would harvest, again, the fall treatment seems to be keeping density lower going into the crop year than the spring treatment. They're both good. They're both way better than doing nothing. But these numbers kind of reflect what I've really been seeing with this combination of products over the past two years for sure. Is that some of the fall treatments with the Chicair and Ignite really have been doing a good job smoking the fescue, and I am finding it's starting to become a bit more consistent now that the fall timing on the fescue does seem to be better than the spring timing. I'm not saying the spring timing is not good either, but the fall timing certainly seems to pack a bit more of a wallop on the fescue than the spring timing. And then this is the yield averaged across the trials, where at least we're able to get yield anyway. And you can see as you go from the control to the spring Chicair and Ignite to the fall Chicair and Ignite, you just get a progressive increase in yield there as well. Okay. And so if you find the spring windows a little tight, especially we've had some springs over the last sort of 3 to 4 years where even based on the degree day models, the blueberries are moving early. And so, those types of springs, they make it tough to get Spartan out. They make it tough to get anything like Chicair and Ignite out as well. So, if that spring window is not working for you, the fall window seems to be quite good. And the biggest challenge in the fall with any product that has to be applied to the foliage of the plant And the biggest challenge I've found with fall timing for Chicaran at night is waiting for the fescue plants to dry after a heavy frost or a dew. And so I've learned this the hard way by pushing my luck. I have sprayed some big trials when there was water on the fescue plants because I was trying to get more done in a day than I should have. And I just ended up having to pull the stakes because I knew right away, as soon as I come back in the spring, you know, compared to sites where the plants were dry, I was like, yeah, that was a bad idea. And so you got to wait until the plants dry off, and depending on how consecutive we're getting with heavy frost and stuff and how much sunlight we're getting, that can be a bit of a challenge there. Now, probably the number one question over this past year is Roundup and fall Roundup use in blueberries. I think this is something that can be extremely useful, and I got absolutely no problem with it at all. I think there's a way it can be used safely. Go for it. It doesn't concern me or anything, but there are a few things to keep in mind with this that I do want to highlight. So to get started, I just want to highlight a few things that are directly from the lamb kill fact sheet, and then I'll provide some results and some of my own thoughts on it here as well. Okay, but if you are thinking, and I'm not saying everybody on the call is, but many folks were considering this going into this past fall. If you are thinking about Roundup in the fall, do keep in mind that the only commercial glyphosate product that was ever evaluated for crop safety at that fall timing is Roundup WeatherMax. So I really encourage you not to mix and match if you are considering a fall application of glyphosate to control or to try to help with weed control. Stick to WeatherMax because it is the only product that really was demonstrated to have crop safety if you follow the proper use pattern. Okay, and the only use pattern that's registered is the one for lamb kill control. Now others are deviating from this, and that's fine, but I'm just want to put it all on the table here. The use pattern that's registered is the one for lamb kill control, and notice I'm not saying the only weed it's registered for is lamb kill. I'm saying the only use pattern that is registered, because I do think this use pattern can be adapted to many weeds. But there are some challenges there, and probably the big one is if you do look at the label and the fact sheet, if you are doing Roundup in the fall, it is really supposed to be used on newly cleared land only. Obviously, I've done trials where it's not on newly cleared land. That is something that is on the label, and that would technically mean piece of land that's less than 5 years from having the woods cleared, I think is how that's sort of worded on the label and on the fact sheet. That's the hardest box to check for most folks, because most of the land that you would be interested in trying glyphosate on would be well past this for many growers. Okay, some other things here is it really should only be used on land that's harvested in the year of application. The reason for that is the harvesting will sort of facilitate much more rapid leaf loss off of the blueberry plants. And so, you know, my advice to many folks is don't go easy on them when plant the blueberries when you're harvesting. If you're going to put Roundup out, beat the shit out of them, quite frankly, because you kind of want those leaves to come off of the blueberry stems as fast as possible in order to facilitate this application. The rate's 1.67 liters per hectare. Don't go above that, because above that has not been proven safe. And you can maximize or at least minimize your risk to the blueberries by applying to weedy areas only, and applying before mowing, but after 95% blueberry leaf drop. Okay, so you really want the blueberry stems to be bare twigs. That's when you would want to be applying that. And if possible, I would recommend doing it before mowing, not after, but we'll expand on that here a little further in a moment. Flail mow 2-3 weeks after is what I tend to go by. if I'm doing a fall trial with glyphosate before mowing, which I'll talk about in a moment, I like to give something like glyphosate a solid 3 weeks to soak in and get moving through the plant. And if you don't get the field mowed in the fall, it's not the end of the world, but just make it your #1 priority in the spring. That gets done before anything else, and you should be all right. And then just use it once every 2 cycles to minimize any chance of injury. Okay, so hopefully that all makes a little bit of sense. Now, I mentioned this in the fall, so I'm not going to show everything from this trial that I mentioned in the fall, but one of the weeds that I've been interested in sort of seeing if we can adapt that lamb kill use pattern to is red fescue. It stays potently green well into the fall, and it's a very thick grass that tends to cover the blueberries, so it intercepts a lot of the spray. It's a pretty good candidate for this type of approach to dealing with it. So I just want to highlight a couple things from this trial. So this was a trial site up outside of Spring Hill and Lynn Mountain. This is what the site looked like on November 3rd. And so you can see the grass here. You can see the blueberries have lost their leaves. And I applied the herbicides that I'll talk about here in a moment on November 3rd. And then I came back and push mowed the plots with my lawnmower on December 1st. So again, I tried to give it a solid 3 weeks before mowing that off. These were the treatments that I looked at. So again, my main interest was just whether or not Roundup would do anything with this grass. But I also used the trial as a chance to do a bit of screening. So had curb in there, and then also had Chikara, Roundup, Chikara Ignite, Roundup Ignite, Roundup Chikara, blah, blah, blah. You can see them all right there. The data are percent cover because you don't count red fescue unless you've got an unlimited access to time. You can count it, and we have done that in the past, but it's quite a demoralizing endeavor, quite frankly. And so for a sort of a quick and dirty trial, percent cover is much more efficient than counting grass, quite frankly. So you can see it was solid, almost 90% on average coverage in the plots in the fall. This is the cover in June. And so you can see Roundup did knock that grass back quite well. Chikara Ignite knocked it back. And then the most promising treatment was Roundup and Chikara. Looked quite good on it, and did hold the best throughout the sprout year as well. So that's cover in June 2024 after the fall treatments there. So this is a Roundup plot in July. There's a trial edge. So Roundup in my trial, it didn't finish it off, and there was some regrowth. One of the challenges with this grass, though, is it does spread by rhizomes. And so in a small plot trial, get a lot of creep in from the sides and the pathways. So it can kind of convolute the results a little bit. And then this is a Roundup and Chikara plot in July as well. And in this one, you can actually see the outline there. It was noticeably more effective. There was a boost in control over the Roundup alone with this. And again, I followed the lamb kill guidelines. Blueberry tolerance was good. Bud numbers were good and so on. Nothing that I got overly excited about with that. And then this is a control plot in October versus a Roundup and Chikara plot in October there as well. Okay, so what I'm hoping to do is scale this up and just take the Roundup and the Roundup Chikara into some bigger plots, hopefully this coming fall, to kind of continue to put that to the test. I showed this picture in November, but this was a grower test with Roundup. And so this whole strip that you can see here in the image, I didn't see it. This is fall of the sprout year. The previous fall after harvest, the grower indicated to me that this entire visible area was more or less solid with the red fescue that you can see here, and looks something like that I got up here in the top right corner. And what he did is he mowed in early November. He had to mow twice to get through the goddamn stuff. That's what he told me. But then he waited 3 weeks, and the red fescue is quite a cold tolerant grass. It is a very aggressive grass. And he actually said that it had a fair amount of regrowth come back up after mowing, and he applied Roundup. I believe it was December 1st. He told me, he said his sprayer was freezing up at the end of the day on cleanout. And this is what the field looked like the following fall, so a year after application almost. And you can see excellent blueberry tolerance here, and very, very good red fescue control. So I do think as you kind of scale up, it's kind of looking like as you know, as many of you as growers kind of beat me to it. As you kind of do larger and larger plot sizes, the efficacy does seem to be there at that 1.67 liter per hectare rate. So potentially a very interesting and cheap a way to get, maybe not just for red fescue, but the crop tolerance really does seem to be there. And this is some data from, I went to every trial I had Roundup in and just compared the stem density of the blueberries, the stem height, the yield, and the flower buzz per stem, just between the control and Roundup. And again, I had the Roundup. It didn't increase any of these, but it didn't decrease them either. And so generally, I think that the fall timing, I would always encourage it to be done before mowing, so that any blueberry material contacted by the spray gets mowed off. That would be my advice. But these data are from trials I did where I went in after mowing, and the crop tolerance seemed good. And I'd like to say, you know, this grower had very good luck with it as well. Okay. If you do see any injury from a fall Roundup application, assuming that your sprayer was calibrated properly and you applied the proper rate uniformly, etc. Generally, the injury from it, and there can be some, and how it generally sort of manifests itself is sort of this yellowish feathered like regrowth of the blueberry plants from any old cut stems that were not pruned close enough to the ground. So that regrowth from the above ground parts of the plant, that seems to be where you can potentially get some lingering glyphosate injury. And in many cases, that may not be enough to cause any issues, and glyphosate may actually kill some of that overwintering stem material as well. I don't know. It's something that kind of needs to be figured out. But what I would say is, we've been sort of, myself and a grad student we've been working on trying to revise the old degree day model for blueberry emergence to try to help improve timing of things like pesticide applications in the spring, and to kind of help Hugh and them with the, you know, with the farm data tools and stuff. And as part of this work, we've actually been modeling the emergence of new stems, both from the old cut stems, which is the white circles, and from the rhizomes, which is the black circles here. And the y-axis here is blueberry shoot emergence, again, as a percent of total, so that we can standardize the y-axis from 0 to 100. And so again, if you go over here from 20, what this dot means is 20% of the total number of stems emerging from cut stems was emerged at this time. And I've just got the time factor as Julian day, which is just your day of year, because we haven't finished the degree day stuff. Anyway, long story short, what we're finding is in a normal, air quote, normal year here, about 34% of the new stems that emerge in a mowed field will come from those old cut stems, unless those cut stems are killed by a herbicide or by winter kill, by burning, etc. And so if you think about that, if you put out a fall application of glyphosate and you maybe did your mowing in a bit of a hurry, or your blades weren't sharp, and you've got a lot of above ground blueberry growth left when you make that application, you're going to get a lot of your new stems coming back from that old that uncut growth. And if it has absorbed and held on to Roundup, and that Roundup moves out into the new stems that are emerging, and you get that yellow feathered stuff, it may or may not affect your yield potential and your ultimate yield and the health of the plants and so on. I have no idea. There's lots of work that could still be done here to answer a lot of questions there. But the reality is that if you don't destroy that above ground growth one way or another, it's going to contribute to your shoot population or your blueberry stem population, at least to some extent. And if those stems are weak and damaged, then it may hurt on the whole field scale. It may hold the field back or potentially affect yield. Okay, but that's all skepticism, or not skepticism, but I'm getting tired here. I can't remember think of the word I'm looking for here. Speculation, sorry. At this point, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Now, one thing I did want to acknowledge here with this is you can kind of see that the white circles here, which is your new stems coming from the old cut stems, notice that they're emerging sooner than the stems from rhizomes, because these white circles, they're coming from above ground growth, and that starts to move faster. So if you've ever been a little bit nervous, with a spring herbicide application or something like Care and Ignite, the field seems to be moving slow. It's in my experience, it's almost exclusively because the Ignite component here, to the large part, I'm not scapegoating Ignite, it's just what it does, and it's fun. You get a chemical pruning, and so you lose a lot of these stems coming from the old cut stems, and you seem to get more from the rhizome. And so this was in a grower field where we just looked in an area that hadn't got sprayed with Care and Ignite versus one that did, and we just did 50 sort of random quadrats, and you can see where Care and Ignite wasn't applied. On average, there was around 140 blueberry stems per square meter coming from the old cut stems, and where Care and Ignite was applied, it was down around 40. So you just get less of that above ground regrowth and more below ground regrowth, and the below ground regrowth just takes longer. It just takes longer to come up. Hey, now the one other point I wanted to make here, a couple other points, but I'll do the fourth one first, is always remember with Roundup is that there's no residual activity. So the day after you apply Roundup to any weeds that emerge the day after you apply it, in their world, you didn't apply Roundup. It's no longer, it will have efficacy primarily on what was green when you sprayed it, and anything that emerges later that day or the next day and so on is more or less going to be unscathed. And so you're mainly looking at your hope with something like Roundup is a suppression or control of what's there when you spray, but it will have no holding power whatsoever. So I can guarantee you, if you do a fall Roundup application in a mowed blueberry field or before you mow, and you don't put anything else out for weed control, by the end of the sprout year, you're probably going to have quite an interesting smorgasbord of weed growth and in potential things like hardwoods and stuff like that. Okay, so just remember that it has no carryover effect, and the control of weeds besides land kill, it may or may not be similar to other registered treatments. So just because it's Roundup, in my experience with Roundup in blueberries, you don't get the same results with it that you get in a cornfield, because it's a completely different weed flora, and therefore I rarely find it providing that 100% kill of the weeds that are present. It can still knock them back pretty good, but you're not necessarily going to get 100% control of everything just because you're applying a Roundup. Okay, so this was a trial on hair fescue, where I was looking at Roundup in conjunction with the Ignite and Jacara back when I was first working with this stuff. And so I'm just showing this just to give you some insight as to what you could expect with Roundup on, say, something like hair fescue. So the treatments are exactly the same as I had for that red fescue trial, except that there's no curb treatment here. You can see the fescue density here in the fall. So these treatments were all applied fall after mowing. 3 sites there, and you can see the application dates when the fall treatments were applied. Starting density, this is density in the fall of the sprout year, and so you can see the Roundup knocked the fescue back relative to the control, but it's still, by the Roundup by itself, wasn't as effective as the Roundup with Chikara, Chikara with Ignite, or the Roundup plus Chikara plus Ignite, which I wouldn't do the 3 of these. It's redundant. You're just adding too much there. You're not getting any further ahead. So we just kind of look at the Chikara and Ignite here versus Chikara versus the Roundup. Again, the Roundups, it's not really getting you there. But I would say that there are a lot of things about Roundup that can affect its efficacy. So you can have the water hardness, the water volume that you use. Roundup actually somewhat prefers a lower water volume than a lot of other herbicides, for example, as well. So if there was interest from the industry, there would be some work to be done to fine tune the parameters for maximizing fall weed control with something like Roundup. But I find it's a standard spray at 200 liters per hectare. It doesn't seem to pack the same punch as, say, Chikara Ignite on fescue, Spartan on sheep sorrel, and so on. And then this is in the crop year, and you can see almost complete recovery in the Roundup treatment versus some of the others here. Okay, and then this was the yield from that trial, and so basically you can just divide this into 2 groups. Everything with Chikara down here at the bottom is pushing or above 4,000 pounds to the acre, and everything above without it here is kind of down around 2,500 there. Okay, so letter groupings be damned. I have this huge variability in here. So again, if the trial was able to be done, more sites, more reps, etc., maybe you pick something up there. But again, when it comes to yield, the Roundup's not giving you any boost relative to the control, whereas some of the more standard treatments simply are. And if I had curb in this, I'm sure the curb treatment would have been the best, right? Hey, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Some thoughts there, some things to think about with that. I think it's the fall use of glyphosate is something that many of you can get some really, really good mileage out of, but I do encourage you to, if you have applied this, I do encourage you to just keep an eye, have a close look at your field, kind of look at emergence from old stems that didn't get completely cut and so on, and just have a look at the field, see how it responds. I'd be very curious to hear about the experiences that folks would be having with it. Hey, now the last thing that I wanted to mention tonight is the fact that I got a lot of questions sort of come up at the November meeting about, so one person had asked in the audience after my presentation, but then numerous other folks had asked about it as well, is spreading dog bane. I don't have a magic herbicide for you. I still just simply recommend dicamba, but just from some conversations that I had, I'm getting the idea that there's still a lot of applications on dog bane that are just happening a bit too early to maximize efficacy. So I just wanted to reiterate some things to think about when you're dealing with some of these creeping perennials. And then obviously, if you look at this picture, if that's your field, you're done. I don't have an answer to that by any means. That is one hellishly bad situation to have to deal with there, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. Now, this is my sort of rudimentary attempt at a dog bane plant here because I don't have a picture of a real one that shows the roots and the shoots. But when you look at weeds like dog bane, goldenrod, etc., just remember there's as much of the weed or more below ground as there is above ground. And it's what's below ground and you can't see that you want to kill. So when you spray or do anything to dog bane, goldenrod, etc., what happens to the above ground, if you want it dead and gone, what happens to the above ground part of the plant is almost irrelevant in many cases. It's what's going on below ground and how much activity and death you're getting below ground that is really what you're aiming for. And you just got to follow some basic, simple rules to maximize that root kill. And it's all based on sugar, carbohydrate, or CHO, food movement, energy movement, numerous terms we can use here to keep things general. But what I just want to go through, I've gone through this before, but I just want to reiterate it again tonight so that hopefully some folks will have a bit more success going into this spring and summer. So what I've got here in this diagram is emergence, vegetative growth, flower bud, flowering and seed production, and then after seed set, growth stages for dog bane. I got an attempt at the roots here at the bottom, and then I got a rectangle sandwich between them. And this rectangle is simply going to indicate the arrows or show arrows indicating the direction of food movement or energy movement, either from the roots up to the shoots or from the shoots back down to the roots. And it's when there's movement of resources from the shoots back down to the roots that you want to spray a plant like dog bane to maximize the efficacy. And so early in the spring, when the patches of dog bane in your field just start to pop up and begin to grow, what's going on there is food reserves that have been stored in the roots over the winter are getting remobilized, moved upwards, and used to support the growth of the new stems. And as those stems continue to grow, they're going to progressively deplete or use up the food reserves that are stored in the underground root system, and the roots are actually going to get progressively weaker the bigger those stems above ground get. And those stems will continue to increase in size and continue to drain food reserves from the roots until those stems approach sort of the peak height or the early flower bud stage, at which point those stems become large enough, they have enough leaves and enough leaf area, they're doing enough photosynthesis, they can make all the primary metabolites they need to sustain their own growth, and eventually they hit a tipping point where they make more than they need, and they can begin to funnel resources back down into the root system to begin to replenish what they took from the root system during early growth. So they're kind of paying back a loan kind of thing when the arrows are moving downwards here. And the shoots will move food reserves, energy, carbohydrate, doesn't matter. They all analogous here for the purposes of this discussion. So the shoots will be moving stuff down back into the roots as the stems approach their maximum height. That's a little hard to gauge from year to year. The most reliable indicator is the presence of flower buds. As soon as you see little clusters of flower buds or just start to see the first white flowers on dog bane, that's a surefire sign that the stems are making enough sugars that they're translocating some back down to the roots at that time to help refill the root system. And then as you get further and further into flowering, usually by mid-flowering, then the plant is beginning to reallocate reserves back upwards towards the flowers, the seeds, the fruit, etc. And then once the plants finally produce viable seeds and those seeds are blowing around in the wind, then if the stem is still green at that point, then the sole purpose of that green stem until killed by frost is to make enough sugar, as much sugar as possible, or as much photosynthate as possible, and send that below ground to rebulk up the roots during the winter. So what I just want to show here to reflect what I just said, this is showing the carbohydrate or food reserves in the roots of a weed called hemp dog bane. So very similar to spreading dog bane, it's a different apocynon species, but the biology is analogous here. And so you can see here in early April, before the shoots of this dog bane species begin to pop up out of the ground, you can see the food reserves are 35% of the roots by dry weight. The gas tank is full. The plant's ready to go. And you can see that as the stems emerge and grow and approach the early bud stage, you can see that the food reserves in the roots are being depleted. The roots are getting weaker as those stems continue to grow, and they eventually get big enough. Again, the most reliable indicator is the presence of flower buds. And at this point, notice you can see that the food reserves in the roots actually begin to move back up. In this case, it's not a very steep incline, mind you, but the food reserves are not being depleted anymore, they're being replenished. And that means that at this stage, the stems are sending stuff back down to the roots. And if we apply a herbicide at that time, the herbicide can get moved with that stuff down into the root system at that time. And then as you move into the mid-flower stage, you can see that the root reserves are getting depleted again as the flowering, fruit set, seed production is happening. And then once the plant is finally done setting seeds, all the stem acts as is a sugar factory to replenish the roots, and you get a huge increase in a root growth, or not root growth, but replenishment of the food reserves as you move through the fall. Okay, and this happens year in, year out in a very predictable way for most creeping perennial weeds based on these growth stages. And so when you kind of look at this, you got some control windows here. But if you want to kill the roots of dogbane, you need to apply a herbicide that will get into those roots. And you need to apply that herbicide at a time in which that plant will actually translocate the herbicide to the roots, because herbicides like glyphosate, dogbane, anything that's symplastic, they don't magically spread throughout the plant. They primarily just hitch a ride with stuff that the plant is already translocating around anyways. And they will only go to plant parts that are acting as sinks or are receiving materials from some other part of the plant. And so if the roots are sending food up, the herbicide will go up and stay in the shoot, kill the shoot, and then the dogbane will just grow back. And I hear that a lot. If you apply the herbicide at these times here where the arrows are moving down, then you have a much higher likelihood of the herbicide actually getting into the roots. And at that point, that's when you're going to get that increase in control that you're looking for. It's never going to be 100%, especially if it's the first time you sprayed it. And even if it's the 20th time, it may not be 100%. But you want to maximize it, right? So the idea is apply to the shoot when the shoot will send it to the roots. And that's when the arrows are moving down, and it's these growth stages here. That's the key thing. Okay. Now, I just want to show some data from Hugh's masters. He part of his master's work was on spreading dogbane, and this is looking at applying dicamba to dogbane, either not at all, so a control, before the flower bud stage, and there's the calendar dates there, at the flower bud stage, just as the white flowers are starting to open, and then after seed set. The gray bars that you see here right now, this is the goldenrod density at the time of spraying. And one thing that I want to point out that we kind of learned the hard way with dogbane is note that the after seed set timing here, which was in mid-September, note that there's lower density in this treatment compared to the others. And the reason for that is we were doing this work in blueberry fields that weren't being farmed anymore, or at least were resting. And there was no fungicide applications or anything going on them. And we found in those fields that the dogbane began to go yellow and die back much sooner than it was in other fields that were actively being farmed. And we got caught off guard. We were waiting for them to set seed. And in many cases, before the stems had even finished setting seed, they were already dying back. And so I just wanted to mention that just because if you're kind of playing the waiting game with dogbane throughout the summer, just understand that it can go south pretty fast in late summer, early fall in some cases, particularly if a field's just resting. Okay, that's what was there when we sprayed, and then this is what came up in the following year. Less came back in the following year in all the treatments. I don't know why. It's not uncommon with these weeds as you go from one year to another. But if you just look at the black bars, note that as you go from a control to spray before bud stage, to spray at the flower bud to the flowering stage, and then after seed set here, Note these two treatments here in the middle, where when that timing is closer to when the stems are sending sugars into the roots, note that we're getting much less regrowth in the following year compared to the times when the roots are not sending sugars below ground. And this less regrowth is a reflection of less root biomass because some of the roots have been killed by the herbicide. Okay, so with these types of weeds, it is really important to get that timing right, because that's what's going to dictate how much root kill you get, and that's what you're after with these weeds is the root kill, right? And so this is just another example with goldenrod, where I had done just with a glyphosate spot spray. The gray bars are the density at spraying in year one, and the black bars are density in the year after. And just note, as you go from a control to a spot spraying Roundup on them at the pre-bud stage, to the flower bud stage, to the early flowering stage, to the post-seed stage, just look how your black bar gets progressively shorter and shorter. And so if you go too early, a lot of it comes back the next year and you'll be frustrated. Just look at the difference between spraying too early versus spraying at the right time. It's almost completely eradicated from that site, right? And so getting that timing right means fewer sprays, it means better weed control, and then you can get on with your life and do something else. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. And I just wanted to use tonight as a chance to kind of just reiterate some of these sort of basics. Just because, again, I'm getting the vibe that just from conversations that some of the treatments for stuff like dogbane just potentially going out a bit too early, and that's causing some frustration in the level of control that some folks are seeing. And as I look at the clock, I guess it's a good thing that some other folks were under time, because I have hogged my time.
Not a bit.
That's it. That's what I got for tonight.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you very much, Scott. That was a lot of great information. There's just a couple of questions in the chat here.
Yeah.
Will a fall Roundup treatment have any effect on sheep sorrel?
When I first started, I had Roundup in fall screening for sheep sorrel, and it did knock it back, but I found it variable. So with that, in those trials, those were also the trials where we got on to Spartan, and Spartan was better. But that being said, you will know you applied Roundup to it. So at $6 an acre, or whatever, although involved might be not much more money. You know, yeah, if it's green, most likely a fall Roundup is going to have some activity on it. What I'm just want growers to be cognizant of is just don't assume you can walk away and all that stuff's going to be brown and dead like a cornfield, because it's just not the case in my experience.
Okay. Second question. Could deviations from the recommended pH range lead to resistance or reduced herbicide performance over time?
Yes. Yeah. So one of the biggest issues with herbicide resistance right now is exposing weeds to sublethal doses that acclimates them to it. And then they become, I guess, the super weeds that we tend to hear about. And so yes, it can lead to serious types of resistance evolution, and then sort of more immediate that, yes, it can have effects on weed control. But I think, when I checked our water, because I had never checked it before until I started thinking about this, I thought it was closer to 6, but it's actually closer to 7. Most of the trials I've done, everything seems to work good. I think the biggest thing to always keep in mind with the water is that if you can adjust it, you probably should try if you're too high or too low. But in the absence of that, just mix what you need when you need it and get it applied, and don't really try not to have too much mixed product sitting around any longer than necessary. So mix it, use it. As long as stuff's not mixed for prolonged periods of time, in many cases, the immediate effects, within a couple of hours, it may be negligible unless you're at those real extremes, and then specific products. So it's kind of a loaded question because it's so parameter product specific, that I'll just keep it simple and say yes with a but, and give me a shout if you need to follow up on it.
Perfect. All right, and one more here in the chat. What follow-up practices or monitoring should growers implement after using Shakare Ignite to ensure continued control of hair fescue and prevent reinfestation?
Well, I mean, it's not 100%. So kind of the challenge with it, like many things, is, if you're kind of coming to the end of the sprout year and there's still some left, traditionally you would only have the curb would be your only option, right? My feeling is it's where the clethodim is going to come into play, so that you could have the fall or spring application, and then the clethodim will be the ticket to, what you've knocked back. It'll kind of be to keep it knocked back. And then on top of that, what I would add is what I found is kind of like as Weed Science 101 would indicate, the more fescue there is when you spray, the more that's left after you spray, and the bigger the clumps are. So I don't have a definitive number, but if you've got those big, huge clumps of fescue with 700,000 seed heads on them, that's a tall order for anything to kill, right? So, the bigger the fescue is, the more of it there is, the higher the likelihood that there's going to be some recovery there. And my opinion would be to kind of watch it, and if you need a follow-up treatment with, I think that's again where, as the clethodim crawls across the finish line, that's where you're going to get the most value out of those products. Yeah.
Perfect. No, that's great.
So Scott, did you ever look at doing Roundup in the fall and then Shakare in the spring to see if that makes any difference?
No, you could look at a million.
I'm just curious to give you a bit of
No, I've kind of like a lot of the time, like I've had most of the Roundup work I've done has been on fescue, and it's been in a lot of the trying to look at combos of Roundup Ignite, Roundup Shakare, Roundup with Ultim, and so on, all that work. But no, I haven't done anything in terms of putting it, like laying down a fall Roundup and then follow-up treatments to that. So that could be very interesting. Like there'd be potentially a lot of combinations there that could be very, even just Valpar or something after it too, right? Could be. Yeah. So
just curious.
Yeah, no, I haven't. All the work I've done with it at this point has been sort of at one application time and not layering different timings together. But certainly it would be interesting to look at some combos there with it. Yeah. I don't know, perhaps there's a grower on that has. I kind of feel like I'm getting lapped on the Roundup work. So but definitely, again, there's some nuances with the labeled use of it. But I do think at the price and the potential to help with some really challenging weeds, I think diligent use of it in the fall can be a very good complementary aspect to any weed control program, and blueberries there for sure. Yeah.
Perfect.
Any further questions, Chloe?
That's it in the chat. I don't know if anyone else, feel free to unmute yourself and ask if you'd like.
I haven't got a question, but I would like to thank Agrimark as BPAN's director and as a farmer. This is, I know, is a lot of work to deal with, and the environment people for points and to get everybody on for this thing, but I think it's an invaluable thing that you guys are doing every spring. So thank you from me anyway.
Yeah,
It's
thank
been
you.
our pleasure. We enjoy doing this. And it's actually the big thanks goes out to all the speakers that speak in different topics each year. So, and the pesticide companies for the sponsorship.